The boardroom fell silent as Marcus Chen slid the lawsuit across the mahogany table. 23 pages of legal warfare. Richard Caldwell, CEO of Apex Industries, didn't even bother to read it. He just smiled that predatory smile that had earned him a reputation on Wall Street as the man who crushed competitors for breakfast. "You're making a mistake," Marcus said quietly. Caldwell leaned back in his leather chair, the skyline of Manhattan glittering behind him. "The only mistake here is yours, Chen. You should have taken my buyout offer when you had the chance." Before we continue, drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories about karma and justice, hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what happens next. Marcus Chen wasn't supposed to be a millionaire. The son of immigrants who ran a small restaurant in Queens, he'd worked his way through MIT on scholarships and student loans, sleeping 4 hours a night and living on instant ramen. After graduation, he'd landed a job at a tech startup that struck gold during the dot-com boom. When the company went public, Marcus's modest stock options suddenly became worth $3.7 million. But Marcus wasn't like the other overnight millionaires in Silicon Valley. He didn't buy a Ferrari or a penthouse in Tribeca. Instead, he moved back to Queens, paid off his parents' mortgage, and started thinking about what he really wanted to do with his life. The answer came to him one evening while helping his father close the restaurant. His dad, now in his 60s, winced as he lifted a heavy box of supplies. Years of 12-hour days had taken their toll. "Dad, you should see a physical therapist," Marcus suggested. His father waved him off. "Too expensive. And who has time?" That conversation planted a seed. Marcus started researching the physical therapy industry and discovered something troubling. Millions of Americans were suffering from chronic pain, workplace injuries, and mobility issues, but quality physical therapy was either prohibitively expensive or simply unavailable in many communities. Insurance reimbursements were declining, forcing many independent therapists to close their practices or sell to large corporate chains that prioritized profit over patient care. Marcus saw an opportunity to do something different. He founded Healing Hands Physical Therapy with a radical approach. Affordable, patient-centered care that actually worked. He hired the best therapists, paid them well, and invested in cutting-edge equipment. His clinics were located in middle-class and working-class neighborhoods that bigger companies ignored. And he kept prices reasonable by running an efficient operation with minimal administrative overhead. Within 3 years, Healing Hands had grown to 15 locations across New York and New Jersey. Patients loved them. Therapists loved working there. Marcus wasn't getting rich. He'd reinvested most of his initial fortune into the business, but he was making a difference. That was enough. Then Richard Caldwell noticed. Apex Industries was a healthcare conglomerate that specialized in acquiring small therapy and rehabilitation chains, consolidating them, and squeezing maximum profit from every location. Under Caldwell's leadership, Apex had grown from a regional player to a national powerhouse worth $2.3 billion. But growth required constant feeding, and Caldwell had identified Healing Hands as his next meal. The first approach came in the form of a seemingly friendly lunch meeting. Caldwell, all charm and expensive cologne, laid out his vision over $40 steaks at a midtown restaurant. "Marcus, you've built something impressive," Caldwell said, cutting into his ribeye. "But imagine what you could do with Apex's resources behind you. We could take Healing Hands national. 20 states within 2 years. You'd be president of the division, answering only to me. And the buyout offer." He slid a piece of paper across the table. $22 million. Marcus looked at the number. It was more money than he'd ever imagined having. He could retire at 35, travel the world, never work another day in his life. But he'd visited Apex facilities. He'd talked to therapists who worked there. The stories were all the same. Understaffing, pressure to rush patients through sessions, constant upselling of unnecessary treatments. Apex cared about quarterly earnings reports, not healing. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Caldwell," Marcus said. "But Healing Hands isn't for sale." Caldwell's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "Everything's for sale, Marcus. It's just a question of price. Think about it. I'll give you 2 weeks. Marcus didn't need 2 weeks. His answer was no. When Marcus formally declined the offer, Caldwell's response was swift and brutal. Within a month, Apex opened 4 new facilities, strategically placed within 3 miles of Marcus's most profitable locations. They launched an aggressive marketing campaign, undercutting Healing Hands prices by 20%. They even started poaching Marcus's therapists with signing bonuses and inflated salaries. It was a calculated strategy. Caldwell knew that Healing Hands couldn't match Apex's deep pockets in a price war. The plan was simple: bleed Marcus dry, tank his business valuation, then acquire the dying company for pennies on the dollar. Marcus's CFO, Jennifer Park, laid out the grim numbers during an emergency meeting. "We're losing about $200,000 a month," she said. "At this rate, we'll be in serious trouble within 6 months. We need to either raise prices, cut staff, or close underperforming locations." "We're not doing any of those things," Marcus said firmly. "Our patients need us. Our staff needs their jobs. There has to be another way." But the pressure kept mounting. 3 of Marcus's best therapists left for Apex, lured by salaries he couldn't match. Patient numbers started declining as Apex's marketing blitz convinced people that bigger meant better. One of his landlords, who also happened to own a building that Apex was courting for a future location, suddenly decided not to renew Healing Hands' lease. Then came the dirty tricks. Anonymous online reviews appeared, claiming that Healing Hands used outdated equipment and unqualified staff. None of it was true, but the damage was done. Local news outlets received tips about supposed safety violations at Marcus's clinics, investigations that went nowhere but generated negative headlines. Marcus knew exactly who was behind it all, but knowing and proving were 2 different things. The final blow came when Marcus discovered that Apex had filed complaints with the state health department, alleging licensing violations at 3 Healing Hands locations. The complaints were baseless, but they triggered mandatory inspections that disrupted operations and scared away patients. That's when Marcus decided to fight back. Marcus hired a lawyer, Sarah Goldstein, who specialized in corporate warfare. She was a partner at a small but fierce litigation firm that took cases the big white shoe firms wouldn't touch. "You need to understand what you're up against," Sarah told him during their first meeting. "Caldwell has an army of lawyers and unlimited resources. Going after Apex is like bringing a knife to a gunfight." "Then get me a gun," Marcus replied. Sarah smiled. She liked his spirit. "Okay, but if we're doing this, we do it right. We need evidence that Apex is engaging in anti-competitive practices, tortious interference, and fraud. That means investigators, depositions, and a lot of billable hours. This won't be cheap." "I didn't start Healing Hands to get rich," Marcus said. "And I'm not going to let a bully destroy what we've built. Do whatever it takes." What Sarah discovered over the next 3 months was worse than Marcus had imagined. Her investigators uncovered a pattern of predatory behavior that went back years. Apex had used the same playbook against at least 7 other small therapy chains across the country. They'd crush the competition through predatory pricing and dirty tricks, acquire the struggling companies for cheap, then immediately raise prices and cut quality of care. But there was more. Sarah's team found evidence that Apex was systematically defrauding Medicare and Medicaid by billing for services never rendered, using unqualified staff members to provide treatments billed at therapist rates, and pressuring therapists to falsify documentation. The scale of the fraud was staggering, potentially hundreds of millions of dollars over a decade. They also discovered that Caldwell had personal financial motivation for aggressive expansion. He'd taken out massive personal loans to buy Apex stock on margin, betting that continued growth would drive the share price up. If Apex's growth stalled, Caldwell would face margin calls that could wipe him out personally. Sarah compiled everything into a devastating lawsuit: antitrust violations, tortious interference, fraud, and defamation. But she added one more element that made Marcus uncomfortable. "We're also filing a COTAM action under the False Claims Act," she explained. "That means we're suing on behalf of the federal government to recover money Apex stole from Medicare and Medicaid. If we win, you're entitled to a percentage of what's recovered, could be tens of millions of dollars." Marcus shook his head. "I don't want their money. I just want them to stop. I understand, Sarah said. But the threat of a massive federal investigation is the only leverage that might actually make Caldwell back down. He can survive a private lawsuit. He can't survive federal prosecutors crawling through his books. Reluctantly, Marcus agreed. Which brings us back to that boardroom meeting, where Marcus slid the lawsuit across the table to Richard Caldwell. Caldwell's lawyer, a silver-haired partner from one of New York's most prestigious firms, quickly scanned the documents. His face went pale. This is a nuisance suit, Caldwell said dismissively. We'll have it thrown out in a month. Read page 17, Marcus said calmly. The lawyer had already found it. That page detailed specific instances of Medicare fraud, complete with internal Apex documents, testimony from former employees, and billing records that investigators had obtained through subpoenas. The evidence was damning. Where did you get this? Caldwell demanded, his composure finally cracking. Discovery is a wonderful thing, Sarah said from her seat next to Marcus. But here's what you need to know, Mr. Caldwell. The moment we file this lawsuit, we're required by law to serve a copy on the Department of Justice. They have 60 days to decide whether to intervene and take over the case themselves. Based on what we've found, I'd say there's about a 99% chance they'll be very interested. Caldwell's lawyer leaned over and whispered urgently in his ear. The CEO's face went from angry red to ashen white. What do you want? Caldwell finally asked. Marcus had thought carefully about this moment. He could destroy Caldwell, and part of him wanted to, but that wasn't who he was. First, Apex immediately ceases all operations within 10 miles of any Healing Hands facility, Marcus said. Second, you issue a public statement acknowledging that the complaints filed against my company were baseless and apologizing for any harm caused. Third, you make whole any therapists you poached from us who want to return, matching their current salary and benefits. And fourth, you sign a legally binding agreement never to acquire, compete with, or interfere with Healing Hands again. And if I do all that? Caldwell asked. Then we hold this lawsuit for 90 days, Sarah interjected. If you comply fully with every term, we'll withdraw it without filing. The Justice Department never needs to know what we found. But if you violate even one provision, we file immediately, and I personally deliver a copy to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Caldwell looked at his lawyer, who nodded grimly. They both knew they had no choice. Fine, Caldwell spat. But understand this, Chen. No, you understand this, Marcus interrupted, his voice hard. I didn't want this fight. I just wanted to run my business and help people. You came after me because you saw a smaller competitor and thought you could bully me out of existence. That was your mistake. He stood up, gathering his papers. I grew up watching my parents work themselves to exhaustion in a system that didn't care about them. I built Healing Hands because I believe people deserve better. And I'm not going to let someone like you destroy that just so you can add a few more zeros to your net worth. You've got your deal, Marcus continued. But cross me again, and I'll make sure every newspaper in America knows exactly how Apex Industries really operates. Are we clear? Caldwell didn't answer. He didn't need to. The look on his face said everything. Caldwell honored the agreement. He had no choice. Within 2 weeks, Apex had closed the facilities near Healing Hands locations and issued a public apology. For therapists returned to Marcus's company, their salaries matched and morale restored. But the story didn't end there. Despite the non-disclosure provisions in the settlement, someone leaked details of the Medicare fraud allegations to a healthcare industry newsletter. The journalist who received the tip started digging. Within 6 months, the Department of Health and Human Services had launched a formal investigation into Apex Industries. Caldwell was forced to resign. Apex paid $340 million to settle federal fraud charges and divested half its facilities to avoid criminal prosecution. The company's stock price collapsed, wiping out Caldwell's leveraged investment. The man who'd once been worth hundreds of millions on paper ended up declaring personal bankruptcy. Meanwhile, Healing Hands thrived. Without Apex's interference, Marcus was able to expand organically, opening new locations in underserved communities. He implemented a scholarship program to help promising physical therapy students afford graduate school, ensuring the next generation would have passionate, well-trained caregivers. Marcus never took a cent from the Katam lawsuit settlement. He directed his entire portion, nearly $8 million, into a non-profit foundation that provided free physical therapy to low-income families. On a warm spring evening, Marcus stood in the newly opened 20th Healing Hands facility, this one in the Bronx, watching as his mother cut the ribbon. His parents had finally retired from the restaurant business, though his father still came by to offer unsolicited advice about running a company. Sarah Goldstein was there too, now serving as Healing Hands General Counsel. She'd left her firm to join Marcus full-time, drawn by his vision of business as a force for good. "You ever hear from Caldwell?" she asked. Marcus shook his head. "Last I heard, he was consulting for some private equity firm in Florida. Smaller deals, lower profile." "Any regrets about how things went down?" Marcus watched as patients and therapists mingled, celebrating the new facility. An older woman was showing off her improved mobility after 6 months of treatment, tears of gratitude in her eyes. A young therapist was excitedly explaining the new equipment to a colleague. "No regrets," Marcus said. "Caldwell wanted to turn healthcare into just another commodity to be bought and sold for profit. He forgot that we're supposed to be helping real people with real problems. That's not something you can put on a balance sheet." He paused, then smiled. "Although I do hope he learned something from the experience." "What's that?" "That being bigger doesn't mean you're stronger. Being ruthless doesn't mean you're smart. And sometimes, the quiet guy you try to bully turns out to be a whole lot tougher than you thought." Sarah raised her plastic cup of champagne. "I'll drink to that." As the sun set over the Bronx, Marcus Chen looked around at everything he'd built. Not just the physical facilities, but the community of caregivers and patients who believed that healthcare should be about healing, not just profit. He'd been tested, pushed to his limits, and forced to fight a battle he never wanted. But he'd won. Not because he was greedy, not because he wanted revenge, but because he refused to let a bully destroy something good. And that made all the difference. Sometimes the greatest victories don't come from crushing your enemies, but from standing firm in your principles when it would be easier to walk away. Marcus Chen didn't set out to destroy Richard Caldwell. He just refused to let Caldwell destroy him. In the end, that was enough. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that doing the right thing can still win in the end. Drop a comment below and let us know. Have you ever had to stand up to a bully in business or in life? What happened?